Their study was how many dog bones does it take in the medical records to satisfy a dog? Happy Friday, Baylor College of Medicine and friends of Baylor. Well, I got a call from my sister. She's in Amsterdam smelling the tulips. And I said, "What are you doing in Amsterdam?" And she said, well, she just had to go. So, as it turns out, she's like all the other Americans. There's a really interesting Washington Post article showing the Americans are no longer saving money. They're all spending it. We're the lowest we've ever had. And why? Because after the pandemic, people want to do trips that you only live once. And those words came out of my sister's mouth. You only live once, I'm going to Amsterdam. So apparently that's what everyone's doing. People are vacationing more and saving less, particularly international travel. And if you look at it, I mean, everyone's going to Europe. Everybody I know is like, oh, I'm going to Europe. So consumers spent $145 billion more in February than last month before, mostly on services. Meanwhile, personal savings are falling. And it's mostly they're spending on things that they missed out on, travel, hotels, vacation. I don't blame them. That's what I'm doing. Credit card debt has risen by 22% since the pandemic, and more shoppers are doing the old buy now, pay later. I love that. I'll pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. Bank of America cardholders, for example, spent 7% more on travel and entertainment last year than they did in 2022. And European summer vacations are up 26%. 22% of Americans say they're planning to vacation in a foreign country. I'd ask my sister, but she's traveling in a foreign country. Live Nation, if you know, that does all Ticketmaster and all that kind of Live Nation set a record, $23 billion in sales last year. So everyone's going to everything. Meanwhile, people are canceling their subscriptions to HBO Max, Disney Plus, grocery delivery, that's out again. People are going shopping. And my favorite is, no one wants a Peloton anymore. They're going back to the gyms. So that's all. This is all post-COVID recovery. It's funny to watch because I feel exactly the same way. So the good news, there's a lot of good news. The hospitalizations continue to be down. Wastewater viral burden continues to be really low. But there's always something. So last month, as I've been telling you for a while, this JN1 has been the dominant strain, the purple there, in all the wastewater, and it's not really mutated. So it took over in February, and it's been there. In just 1 month, this is how viruses work. Just look at the gray bar here. In just 1 month, KP2 is now 25% of all the viruses, with JN1 only 22%. So within 1 month, one new strain, which has 2 mutations, has taken over. And the concern, of course, is that there's growth advantage, and our immunity's waning from our vaccines. Will there be a surge again? So what is the difference? It's 2 mutations. This is in the spike protein, an arginine to threonine substitution, a phenylalanine to leucine, which the abbreviations are R to T and F to L, which is why they're being called the flirt mutations. Yeah, I don't know. Scientists are crazy. But it's amazing how just those 2 mutations provide a tremendous growth advantage. This is from Eric Topol's blog. You can see the tremendous growth advantage by just those two mutations. So where do they? I've shown you this before. The relatedness tree. Remember, our vaccine is the XBB 1.5, but these are all the BA 2.86. We talked about that. Came from Europe. We all expected to really take over because it had like 30 mutations, but it didn't until it acquired one mutation, became JN1. And JN1 has dominated until now KP2, or the flirt mutations. So the modeling is, because of the increased infectivity, are we going to begin to see, this has been the wastewater analysis, are we going to begin to see an uptick? And if we see an uptick in the wastewater, we know that we'll see an uptick in cases. So we don't know, but there's a reasonable bet that somewhere along in early summer, we may see a resurgence. And so people ought to be thinking about, when did I get my last vaccine? When was I last infected? But for those over the age of 60 in particular, if you've been over 6 months, if we begin to see a surge in cases, I would probably get an updated vaccine. But I'll let you know. I haven't gotten my updated vaccine. It's been over 6 months. I was sort of waiting till the fall to get mine. But I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. So what's going on with bird flu? As if coronavirus isn't enough, we have to worry about pathogenic influenza from birds. Well, now there are 9 states that have cattle reporting H5N1, which is the avian bird flu. This particular strain of virus comes from geese from the Guangdong province in China. And the concern, of course, is that if it continues to circulate in wild birds and moves to mammals, that somehow it could eventually go from cows to people or cows to swine to people. Interestingly enough, there's some investigators this was published in the Emerging Infectious Disease by the CDC, investigators that looked to see whether or not these particular strains can infect swine or pigs. And it turns out they can infect the lungs of pigs, but they don't seem to replicate in the upper airways. The concern because of that is we know that swine viruses, influenza A viruses in pigs, jump to humans fairly often. And could it recombine then? Could there be the bird flu get into pigs and somehow recombine with the swine flu that would give it the opportunity to transmit to humans? That's just all speculation. There's no evidence for that yet. But the CDC has noticed that there is spread within cows. There's cow-to-cow spread within herds. We've had cows to poultry. We've seen different dairy cattle movements infect other cattle. And most of the cattle don't seem to have clinical signs, but the ones that do get a 2-week illness and the milk color changes. And there was a microbiologist in Kansas that noted that one of the virus had a mutation that was notable for adaptation to mammals, but the CDC said this has been seen before. It doesn't seem to really imply that we'll jump to people. So really the current recommendation or the sense by the CDC and most everyone is that there's still a low chance that it will recombine and jump to humans, but it is a concern because it is really in mammals. It's also recently been detected in milk, but not as infectious viruses just by PCR. So that's fairly common. Viruses are excreted in milk, and if it's an infected cow, but it's pasteurized, so all the viruses are killed. But if you do PCR, you can amplify bits of the virus, so it's not infectious at all. So people shouldn't worry about that. But there's a lot of testing that's going on. So the FDA is doing a lot of testing of cattle and of milk samples. The other thing that's important is how are we thinking about if it does? Are we getting prepared? So we already know that Tamiflu will be effective. So their CDC is already saying, well, let's gear up our testing capacity. And of course, we could develop a vaccine. And there are 2 vaccine candidates that would match the sequences pretty well. So no one's asleep at the wheel this time. They're testing. They're amping up their ability to test. They're stockpiling Tamiflu, and their candidate vaccines under trial right now to make sure that if it were to expand, we would actually be in a better position than we were with COVID. There's also mandatory testing of all dairy cattle now that are moving from state to state, and there's mandatory reporting from laboratories to test for these viruses. So I feel like the CDC is following it. It's out there. It is a concern. And the main thing is we want to be prepared if it does suddenly jump to humans. And as we've seen before, and I reported, it can go from cattle to people. Remember the guy from England who was handling ducks and got infected? But it seems to be a dead end, doesn't replicate in people to the point where it can jump to other people. So I want to end today with a bunch of shout-outs. First of all, congratulations to Dr. Hashim El-Sarrag, who's the chair of the Department of Medicine and vice president of the Learning Health System Initiative. He was named the recipient of the American Gastroenterological, easy for me to say, Association William Beaumont Prize in Gastroenterology. And this is really a huge award. It's for people who've made significant contributions for patients with digestive diseases. He's an outstanding, internationally renowned clinical epidemiologist. So congratulations to Hashim. Also, this week, Time Magazine announced the Time 100 Health 2024, their new annual list of 100 individuals who most influenced global health this year. I was shocked, absolutely shocked. Lilly was left off the list. But Dr. Peter Hotez, of course, made it. So the dean of our National School for Tropical Medicine, obviously with his development of the vaccine that is easily producible, relatively inexpensive, and more stable at room temperature, and is now hundreds of millions of doses in India, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Africa. He deserved it. Also, Dr. Mark Koenig received the Alzheimer's Association Houston and Southeast Texas Chapter Inaugural Volunteer of the Year Award for his 30 years of work with the association helping families impacted by Alzheimer's disease. And finally, a big shout out to Vamshi, I can never pronounce his last name, so it's Vamshi, and his IT team for helping the planning committee and getting the judges for this year's Datathon. We had 17 project teams who used big data sets that Vamshi helped manage to find innovative solutions to healthcare issues and problems. Thanks for everyone who submitted and presented, and especially to the award winners. It was a great event, and I really enjoyed it. So have a wonderful weekend. Janet, have fun in Amsterdam, and I can't wait to see you next week.